Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We're here today because the federal government has announced an expanded travel ban that will take effect on January 1st, 2026. For many people, this announcement has raised fear, confusion, and a very real question about safety, family, and the future. I want to be clear about our purpose today. This conversation is about clarity, not panic. It is about understanding what has changed, who is impacted, and what we can do right now to protect ourselves and our loved ones. We know from experience that moments like this create a lot of misinformation, and our goal today is to slow things down, explain what we know, name what we do not know yet, and make sure communities have accurate guidelines and real resources. Our panel will focus on the legal landscape of the expanded travel ban, how it affects specific communities, including Syrians, Palestinians, Afghanis, and others, and what this means for people who are already here in the United States. We'll also talk about practical steps people can take and how we can show up for one another as a community. I also want to say this on the outset. If you're a loved one may be affected, CAIR-Chicago operates a travel assistance program hotline. We will share those details again later and we'll drop resources in the chat. You do not have to navigate this alone. This conversation is general information and a know your rights guidance. It is not legal advice for individual specific cases. If you do have specific situations, we strongly encourage you to connect with us at CARE or with an attorney or a trusted legal organization. We are so grateful today to have an experienced panel with us. We have Kalman Resnick, partner at Hughes Sokol Piers Resnick and Dim, and Shana Nissan, an attorney at CAIR-Chicago. My name is Sufyan Sohel. I am a senior advisor for special projects with CAIR-Chicago. Since 2017, have operated and run our 24/7 emergency travel assistance project hotline, and I'm happy to be here to moderate our discussion for today. So first off, I'd like to welcome you all again, and I'm going to pass it off to Kalman, who's going to share a little bit of context of our conversation. Kalman?
Good to be with you all. And this has been a challenging year for all of us since January 20th. I want to say that we're going to be talking about several actions that have occurred since November, the end of November, with regard to the rights of uh, immigrant communities from majority Muslim countries, um, as well as several other countries. But there are really a series of actions, and it's important that we understand that there have been multiple actions and the relationship between them. So first of all, we had actions taken right after the National Guardsmen were attacked in Washington. Those include pausing decisions on all asylum applications for any asylum applicant, included a pause on benefit adjudications by the USCIS for anyone from one of the countries named in the travel ban, and then a announcement that the government will be reviewing all applications for benefits from people from the travel ban countries if they enter the United States after January 20th, 2021, when Joe Biden was inaugurated. Let's put this in some context because there's a relationship between the travel bans and these other attacks that are impacting the Muslim community in particular, the attacks by ICE and CBP on Latino communities around the country. And it's important to understand there's an attack on legal immigration. There's an attack on the growth of immigrant communities, new communities that have grown since the immigration laws were changed in 1965 to open up migration from many countries in Asia and Africa, and since the increased populations of Latinos in the United States. The right wing is out to stop that growth because they see legal immigration and people having access to citizenship as being a threat to the dominance of traditional groups in charge of this society. And We need to understand that there's a relationship between the attacks on the Muslim community, the Latino community, the Asian communities, because we need to build strategies to fight back. Um, we've had this before. I'm a Jewish American. After World War I, in the 1920s, series of laws were enacted to reduce legal immigration that would impact communities from the Jewish community in Eastern Europe, other Eastern Europeans, Southern Europeans, to reduce the influence of those communities and growth of those communities in our society. We fought back against this, and we need to fight back now, and we need to understand why this is occurring and how we can resist and fight back.
Thank you, Kalman. Shauna, let's pivot to you. Can you walk us through the expanded travel ban and how it differs from the previous bans that we've had?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it would be helpful to kind of, to understand what's happening now. I think it's helpful to think about this past year in phases. So, as Kalman mentioned, in January, the administration issued this executive order that kind of generally spoke about this intention to have enhanced vetting. And at that point, back in January, it didn't immediately stop travel, but it sort of began to lay the groundwork by identifying countries that the government claimed had, deficient information sharing systems or whatever sort of their explanation was. And then in June, we saw the groundwork that was actually turned into an actual travel ban. And so the government created these two categories. And so you're looking at one of them now, and this is actually today, but going back to June, the government created two categories: fully restricted countries, where almost all visa issuance and entry is stopped, and then partially restricted countries where certain visas, frankly, the most common, like tourist visas, student visas, exchange visas, were blocked. And then in November and December, as Kalman mentioned, following the National Guard shooting, the administration sort of publicly tied immigration restrictions to these domestic security concerns and announced that the ban would be expanded again. And so what's new now, what's new today, is it's different in scale and in scope. It's broader. So the ban now covers dozens of countries, and it adds new full bans, and it also expands partial bans. And for the first time, it explicitly targets certain travel documents, and we're going to get into this a little bit later, but particularly documents issued by the Palestinian Authority. And also what we're seeing now is many of the exceptions that used to apply, exception meaning, if you fall into this category, you may still be able to be admitted. A lot of those exceptions have been eradicated. And so immediate relatives previously, even if you were from one of the banned countries, if you had a spouse, a parent, or a child from that country, you would still be able to, have them immigrate here. That's no longer. So that's one of the sort of bigger concerns that we're seeing today.
Thank you, Kalman. Any gaps to fill?
Well, I think it's important to understand how this will impact the Muslim community in particular, in terms of people from Syria or from Palestine. Those affected by these new travel bans, for example, frequently people marry someone from back home. But if a U.S. citizen marries someone from back home now, and that person's subject to the ban because they're Syrian or because the only travel document they have is a Palestinian travel document, they're not going to be able to come to the United States. The only exception is for certain conditions that I believe will almost never be applied. And so this is going to have a dramatic effect on the traditions of the communities that frequently people marry someone from back home. It's also going to affect people who immigrate, become citizens, and want to bring their parents here. Their parents are not going to be able to come anymore while this order is in effect. So this is going to be a major change, and we don't know how long it's going to last. But I think it's quite possible this is going to be with us for the entire time that's left in the 3 years of the Trump administration. And it's super important that we figure out if there are ways to resist it and change it, um, and also to make sure that there's political strategies so that we don't have a repetition of this type of administration, and we end up uh, having right-wing rule of our country continuing.
Thank you.
Part of that's going to be important in the elections a year from next year in November, and how active the Muslim community is in these political fights that we're going to be seeing around the country to end Republican control of the Senate and the House.
Thank you. Cal, I'm going to follow up to dig a little bit deeper on Palestinians. What's distinct about how they're impacted, particularly around travel documents? A lot of concern that we're getting. I've gotten a couple even in the chat now about like dual American and Palestinian citizenship, as well as are there any exceptions to any sort of visas for
So
Palestinians?
for those people who are not in the country as of before January 1st, and are subject to this ban, it's going to impact Palestinians whose only travel document is a Palestinian Authority issued document. If someone is Palestinian but also has Jordanian citizenship or citizenship in another country, then we believe the travel ban is not going to impact them if they're traveling with that passport from the other country. What is unclear is how Palestinians who hold Jordanian passports but do not have Jordanian citizenship are going to be impacted. But I think if it's a good possibility, given the language of these policy statements and practice statements issued by the government, that people who are not Jordanian citizens but have Jordanian passports are going to be barred if they are from entering because they don't have dual nationality. Again, this is an open question, but the impact of this on Palestinians whose only passport is a Palestinian Authority issued travel document are not going to be able to come here to study. They're not going to be able to come for weddings as tourists, visitors. They're not going to be able to come to visit sick relatives. And this
How about
also,
work?
and they're not going to be able to get H-1Bs or other types of work visas. When I talk about Palestinians, though, it's important to understand these same impacts going to happen on Syrians who don't hold another passport and don't have citizenship. So Syrians are going to be impacted by this. And this is a major change in the traditions of the community and the relationships. As a Jewish American, I can tell you that when the ban on Jewish immigration from Eastern Europe took effect in the 1920s, it had a dramatic effect on separating the Jews who were outside the United States and the Jews who had been able to immigrate to the United States and their families. Major change, and then we had the Holocaust, in which many Jews died who would have immigrated to the United States but couldn't because of these bans on numerical limitations that made it virtually impossible to come to the United States. This is a major attack on the Muslim community, its future in the United States, its growth, and it's so important that we understand it. So maybe this doesn't impact a particular family. It's not just about one family versus another family that's impacted. It's about the impact of this on the entire Muslim community, the future in the United States, the political strength of the community, its ability to defend Muslim life in America and maintain a healthy and vigorous Muslim community. So it's super important to understand this is not just about whether your particular family is affected, it's an attack upon the whole community.
Thank you for that and centering that, Kelman. Shannon, I want to talk briefly about people from Afghanistan, including those with pending cases, parole, or family reunification applications. Could you talk about the potential impact and the real impact that these communities may face?
Yeah, absolutely. So Afghanistan has been in sort of a full restriction bucket since around June 2025, and it remains there even after this, expanded regime. Media coverage of the December expansion notes that there's been a tightening or removal of certain prior carve outs. So, for instance, there used to be a carve out for special immigrant visas. Or folks, Afghan folks who assisted the US government in some way as translators or in some other capacity, that exception is no longer. So families should assume there's going to be fewer discretionary exceptions unless they fall into this like clearly exempt classification, which are exceptionally narrow. Um, Again, even immediate family members, that's not going to be an exception anymore. Even folks who are in the United States who, let's say, have a green card and are looking to naturalize and are from Afghanistan are also facing difficulty doing so. We've received reports that a lot of oath ceremonies have been canceled as well. And so I think, the biggest advice would be to really just to avoid any unnecessary travel if you have any vulnerabilities. And I think now what is, perceived as a vulnerability is much broader now.
I think
Thank you.
what's really important is that for many Afghans, they felt welcome in the United States. And this is a shock that suddenly the welcome mat has been taken away. And it's much worse, I think, than people really um, necessarily understand. For example, many people came with humanitarian parole from Afghanistan. And after coming here, they applied for asylum. Many of those people have asylum applications that are pending, or they may have been granted. If they're pending, there's a pause on adjudications. If they're granted, then a year later, the people could apply for adjustment of status. The applications for adjustment of status are not going to be adjudicated. They're on pause. You can apply, but no adjudications are occurring. And then what is really challenging, and this doesn't apply just to Afghans, but citizens of the other countries on the travel ban list, the government is going to be reevaluating people who have been granted benefits, been granted asylum, been granted adjustment of status and are permanent residents, and possibly even people granted citizenship through naturalization. So one thing that's super important is to understand that people may be getting notices to appear where they're going to be re-interviewed. And the government's going to be looking for ways in which benefits that were granted can be taken away or benefits that were applied for can be denied. No one should be going to an interview without a lawyer. And it is, do not think that you can talk your way out of a problem or that the government won't find a way, even if it's wrong, to try to take away a benefit or deny it. And so it's super important that people realize how critical it is to getting advice, getting good counsel to represent you, and make sure that the lawyer has reviewed everything in a case before defending you, because it's so important that the lawyer understand what has occurred in the case and prepares a person to appear in an interview. So you don't end up saying something that wasn't intended. It gets you into unnecessary trouble.
Thank you so much. You both did such a good job of laying out the countries under full and partial restrictions and how enforcement shows up, the nuances with a couple of specific countries and the patterns that we're seeing. And I want to continue on the path of how people who are currently in the United States may be impacted. Kalman, you just spent some time talking about pending asylum, TPS, parole, adjustment of cases. A big thing that we've seen since 2017 and even now is the fear of people who are here and them wanting to travel to go to a wedding abroad or visit sick family members abroad. The green card applicants worried if they should even be traveling domestically or locally. And could you both shed some light on that? And Kalman, someone also just mentioned that you're the man in the Q&A, so I just wanted to uplift that comment. They were just giving you a shout out also. But I'd love for you both to spend a little bit just talking about like the do's and don'ts of people who are here and how they should be just preparing and making sure that they and their families are safe.
Well, let me give some practical advice.
Please.
Frequently, people have immigrated to the United States as the parents of U.S. citizens, and they don't spend a lot of time in the United States. They basically are living in the Middle East, for example, and then coming here once a year, once every other year, maybe even longer. And historically, uh, most people have been readmitted when they return and show their green card, or they get fined for not having been in the United States for over a year. They increasingly they're questioning people in this situation at the airports, trying to take away their green cards and deny them entry or admit them only as a visitor. No, anyone who may be out of the United States for more than 6 months should be applying before they leave for a reentry permit, which will facilitate return. That's super important. Yes, it's costly, but it's much more costly to try to be denied entry after returning to the United States or to be put in removal proceedings and detained while you're in removal proceedings in many cases. So reentry permits, if one has to travel and you may be outside the United States for longer than 6 months, people should be applying for a reentry permit. It's not a guarantee, but in most cases, people with reentry permits can return. That's important. Second thing is people who have been social media are going to be reviewed. People's cell phones and laptops are being taken at the airport, even for U.S. citizens, and they're being reviewed to see what's on social media posts. So people need to be aware that, that if you don't want your social media to be reviewed, but upon returning to the United States, that you not have your cell phone or your laptop allow access to that. There are ways in which you can not guarantee, but reduce the ability of CBP, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, to review your social media. You can not bring a cell phone. You can have a burner phone. You can remove from your laptops various social media. All of those should be done so that when you return, that is less likely to become an issue.
Thank you. Sean, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much going to second what Kalman said. I think, if you're a US citizen, you can pretty much always return to the United States, but there could still be a possibility of delays and maybe even secondary screening, particularly if you're traveling to the Middle East or I guess Africa now, or, any of these sort of heavily scrutinized regions. If you're a green card holder, again, green card holders are still a carve out. They're still an exception to this. But, as he mentioned, extended travel, if you're leaving for more than 6 months, even if you're leaving for more than a couple of months, you may want to get advanced parole. If you have any prior immigration issues, if you have any criminal history, I would strongly recommend against it. Or you should have an individualized risk assessment where you make an appointment with Kalman or another immigration attorney and you talk about, what are the risks that you might encounter. And again, lawful permanent residents can still and often are put in secondary inspection, and sometimes they're pressured to sign paperwork to give up their green cards. And so, you do need to be very careful. And then finally, if you have a visa or a pending case, this is really the highest risk category. And travel can just, seriously jeopardize your case. Even if you do have documents like advance parole, I think it's still, kind of a high risk endeavor.
And let me point out there are several other categories of people who should not travel without speaking to an attorney knowledgeable about the immigration law. One is people who have had arrests, criminal arrests in particular. And one thing that's really important here in Illinois is some people plead guilty to crimes because they're told if they get supervision as the outcome, that supervision isn't a conviction once you complete the supervision period. That's true for Illinois law, but for immigration law, a sentence of supervision, even if supervision is terminated successfully, is still a conviction for immigration purposes. That's if you got supervision and you think you don't have any risks, that's not true. Depends what the crime is, what the sentence is, and that has to be evaluated. Really important to understand that super crimes can have a problem. Another group of people, and it's hard to immigrate to the United States, and in immigrating, some people commit fraud. They have a marriage that isn't a real marriage. And if they travel, right now, travel opens up the door to a investigation as to whether how you immigrated was legal. Was that marriage real? Even if the marriage was real and it ended in divorce, you still have to prove that in the current environment when you're returning to the United States. And so it's really important to understand that this government that we now have, this right-wing fascist government, is in the process of using any opportunity in which someone has contact with the immigration authorities to re-adjudicate a person's right to permanent residence, right to naturalization, and that could result in a person then losing their status or being put in removal proceedings, or if they're a citizen through naturalization, having their naturalization revoked by the federal court and then being subject to deportation. This is not a time to say whatever Allah wants will happen. It's not a time to say that, because right now we have a wicked government, an evil government, a fascist government, and the government's going to be attacking people every chance they get for the next 3 years. And it's not a time to put yourself at risk. And I know it's really hard sometimes if you're visiting a sick parent or you're invited to a sister's wedding to say, I can't come right now. But you really need to think through the risks of traveling and how to protect yourself and the family you have here, and make that decision after you really have a good understanding of what risks you're facing.
Thank you for uplifting that. We're getting a number of questions which are very specific and individualized. And, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to address all of those. So we do encourage you to, call the CAIR office or reach out to an immigration attorney, because more and more they're becoming a lot more nuanced of questions. And we don't want to write one answer that's not going to be applicable to everyone who may be on the call. So we understand there's a lot of questions and concerns, but please, please, please make sure
And
you're.
I can go through some of these questions that I'm seeing if you want.
Yeah, we'll save some time at the end for it, but I just want to give
Okay.
a little heads
Okay.
up. Something For having run this hotline, often I see uh, people misrepresenting the reasons why they're coming to the United States on their visa applications, saying they're, coming to Disney World, but they pack 10 suitcases and bring all their personal assets over, and customs stops them at the airport and denies them entry. Other times we see really just biased reasons why families and individuals aren't, and based on where they're coming from, the language they speak, the how they're dressing, or just even how they look. What should people expect at airports or borders? And at what point should someone contact a lawyer?
Well, I think the question is everyone's at risk right now. The level of risk that a person is facing really depends on the specific facts of their situation. If, for example, someone has an arrest, that means you better check with someone as to whether the outcome of that arrest is going to subject you to possible removal proceedings or denial of entry. If someone cannot prove that their marriage that was the basis of their getting a permanent residence, that was a real marriage, then they are facing a risk if they travel. And so, and the risk gets increased. For example, if someone got a green card through marriage and they're traveling with another spouse or a girlfriend or boyfriend, then they're in a situation where the risk is because the government can see you bought two tickets together and you're traveling together, even if you're not in line together at the airport going through inspection. So, if, one thing everyone should understand is the minute a plane leaves for the United States from any country, the manifest, the list of passengers and the immigration status that they have is sent to an office in the United States where people review each person on the plane and whether there's any admissibility issues or criminal issues. And that includes U.S. citizens. So while you're up in the air flying to the United States, U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers are deciding whether you're admissible, whether you might not be admissible, whether you should be subject to secondary inspection. And the evil of secondary inspection is you don't have a right to a lawyer. You're at the mercy of being trying to return home, and you're facing an officer who's trying to get you to admit that you did certain things that might make you inadmissible or may make you removable. And so it's a very uncomfortable position, and you have no right to a lawyer.
Thank you. Oftentimes, I know at the hotline, people contact the hotlines like the day after a family member has been in through secondary or detained, and oftentimes there's very little we could do at that point. So we always encourage to register your travel with the TAP website, and so that we can track and follow individuals' travels and try to intervene early enough. And we have been somewhat successful, but that being said, that these because of these restrictions, is in these with these countries listed, there's very little that can be done if you're from one of these countries trying to enter the United States. Sean, anything to add?
Yeah, just to second that, I think the right time to talk to a lawyer is before the trip, before you book it or even think about it. You should, talk to an attorney to assess whether you should be traveling at all. If a trip is unavoidable, then you fill out the travel form, on TAP US that allows advocates to have, basic information for you on file in case something does go wrong. And then, we always recommend that you have somebody in the US that you trust, a family member, friend, or neighbor, who has all of your information. Like they have, the itinerary for the flight. They know when you're going, when you're leaving, and they have a copy of your passport, your visa or green card if you have one, your A number, and any sort of information. That way, if you are delayed, detained, stuck at the airport or something, we can act much faster to figure out where you are and how we might be able to help you.
Thank you for that. We delved a little bit into long-term community stability. Calvin, you talked about marriage, family reunification, growth, um, and all the other things in life aspects that these new travel restrictions, expanded travel restrictions are going to place on our community members. Shauna, for you, how are organizations like CARE responding to this? It's both legally and organizationally.
Yeah, definitely. So CARE is responding on multiple levels. This isn't just, like you mentioned, it's not just a legal issue, but it is. It's a community stability issue. And so on the legal side, we're providing know your rights education to help families assess their travel risk before they make these sort of like what could be a life altering decision and connecting people to legal representation. On the organizational side, I'd say we're working with coalition partners like ICER and so many others to document, the real world harm that these policies are causing: missed weddings, prolonged family separation, students losing their educational opportunities, getting credits for college and then suddenly losing your visa and having to start over. This impact isn't just abstract, like it's very tangible. And it has a big impact on the people who are affected. On the advocacy side, I'd say we're also, we're doing policy advocacy and media work, and trying to mobilize the community, and also forming coalitions to kind of push back against these bans and to demand transparency and accountability. But I think sort of the biggest part is just preparedness, trying to make sure that the communities know what to expect, how to plan, and how to support each other when something like this might happen.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Kellen, you've been an organizer for decades and a lawyer for even longer. And, I think we're in this moment where there's so much happening, as you mentioned, right? From ICE to travel to just the attack on American democracy in so many ways. How can we, as collective communities from all faiths and backgrounds, do a better job of showing up for one another amidst these growing attacks against all of us?
What I have tried in my work in empowering immigrant communities to tell people is when you're a minority, you have to find ways of increasing your political strength. And I frequently have been asked by Muslim Americans, how did the Jewish community gain as much political power in the United States? And there are many answers to that, but one of them is the Jewish community built alliances with other communities, and those in an effort to find ways to build this political strength of the Jewish community. And I've encouraged the Muslim community to understand that when you're a minority, and a relatively small minority, it's so important to build alliances so that when you defend other groups within the society, you are enable yourself to then have the more allies in your support. And so the broader the tent we build of allies working together to support each other, the better the chance that we will ultimately be able to overcome the challenges that so many Americans and so many people in our country are facing right now. And so I encourage you not to think that what's happening to the detentions of and deportations of Latinos is not something that is distant from you. It is important to see that aligning with the Latino community, aligning with the African American community, aligning with other communities, the Asian community, aligning with other interest groups that are fighting against this regime, is super important. And that we need to find ways to support each other and together win victories for all of us.
Thank you.
And I think this is a real challenge right now to also understand that some of the causes that Muslim Americans care deeply about, and I care deeply about, like the struggle for justice for Palestinians, which I've been involved in for decades. That participation puts us at risk of repression by the government. And I understand that. At the same time, I don't want us to refrain from advocating for justice for Palestine because we're fearful of how it's going to impact a particular person. So, and I get that. And we need to find ways to be able to support each other as we may become targets. And today, there was an announcement by the Trump administration that was published in The Guardian about the Trump administration telling the FBI that they want the FBI to interrogate people and investigate people as possible terrorists because they're part of the immigrant rights movement. They're defending immigrants. And we need to fight back, but it is scary. And that's why it's so important that we build the biggest possible tent to protect all of us.
Agreed, and thank you for that. We're gonna take some time to answer some of these questions. If you permit, I will just try to organize them in a way that we can try to cover a couple of them together. First one is, should holders of Palestinian/Syrian passports avoid applying for naturalization, even if they're eligible, while Trump is still in office?
First of all, there's no ban on applying, but if you're from one of the 19, more than 19 now countries that are subject to adjudication bans, then your application, you could get interviewed, but your application is not going to get adjudicated. Also important, if there's any risk factors like arrests, possible frauds, inability to be able to prove that a marriage-based adjustment or immigrant visa was a valid marriage, a bona fide marriage, those are all issues that affect whether or not you should apply for naturalization. These are, each individual needs to decide for themselves whether they just want to wait to apply to a better time or apply and understand that their application is going to not be granted until these rules are reversed. There's going to be litigation, and it's important. Lawyers are litigating these issues. Lawyers are winning many victories in the courts. Unfortunately, some of the victories are then overturned by the courts of appeals or by the U.S. Supreme Court. Challenging times, and really important to understand this is a good example of why elections are so important, because we have a right-wing Supreme Court because of the victories of Republicans in presidential races and the victories of Republicans in the Senate. So political participation is very, very important. Voting if you're a U.S. citizen, registering to vote, supporting candidates who are going to be working for the civil rights of the Muslim community. Critically important.
Thank you. Next question. We mentioned this, talked a little bit about it, but if someone with a Jordanian citizenship, a Palestinian residency, and travel docs is here on visa through family, should they even bother to try to apply for a green card right now?
Well, if they're eligible to apply for adjustment and they are a Jordanian citizen, then we need to look at how these travel bans may affect the adjudication in terms of, but they're not subject to the ban on adjudication if they're a Jordanian citizen. Which passport they used when they entered could have an impact. The other thing I didn't mention previously, but the new guidelines from the government are saying that the country-specific information may be used to deny a person a discretionary benefit like adjustment of status. So even if your application can be granted, the government may consider whether you're from a country where the factors may be used, factors about that society may be used to deny you a benefit like adjustment of status to permanent residency. And those are really important. The government is sanctioning discrimination based on which country you're from in many ways, including this idea that they could use negative information about your country as a factor in denying you a benefit.
Thank you. As a follow-up to that, so if someone is here legally through work authorization, etc., but their parolee or asylee case is no longer being processed, what risks do they face?
But one risk they face in the is, is that they could get put in removal proceedings. This is a particularly reality for people who entered without documents across the southern border or from Canada, because what we're seeing is that in these cases, the government is trying to terminate proceedings sometimes, and then or deny us pre-termit, which is a term used, or terminate the asylum application in the removal proceedings because of how they entered the country, or because the U.S. under Trump has made these third country agreements that are being used to deny asylum because you could apply for asylum in the third country. This doesn't affect the Muslim community as much as the Latino community because most Muslims who enter the United States enter legally. But it is there are people who have come across the southern border and may be subject to denial of their asylum case under these third country agreements. And this is why it's so important that people get competent legal counsel before they interact with the government. This is not a time to go without a lawyer, even if in the past a family member has had no problem. This is not the world we're living in right now.
Agreed. Thank you. Sean, I want to give you this question. You talked a little bit about the differences between limited ban and full ban countries, and there's some questions on restrictions between the two. One specifically is spouses from limited ban. Are they also banned from reentry if they're not issued a green card yet? Or is that only a full ban country? Could you just maybe spend a little time clarifying the restrictions on both of those buckets?
Yep. So across the board, whether it's a partial ban country or a full ban country, so how do I say this? If I'm a US citizen and I want to petition for, a spouse who's in a partial ban country, I'm not able to. If I'm a US citizen and I want to petition for a spouse in a full ban country, I'm not able to. Immediate relatives is not an exception anymore. So I see another question about, if you have, let's see, where did it go? It was something to the extent of like, if you're an immediate family member, but you don't have a green card yet, can you still get into the country? The answer to that would be no. There is no automatic exception for family members. And the difference between full and partial ban, for partial bans, there are some very narrow categories where you may still be able to be admitted, but they are sort of few and far between. Like I'm thinking like a NATO visa or a diplomatic visa. There are some athletes who are able to enter, and I think maybe that's because of the World Cup that's going to be happening soon. But aside from that, if you're coming as a student, F1, if you're coming as a tourist, B1 or B2, you're not going to be able to enter the country.
Partial bans do not affect people who could come in, for example, on an H-1B.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't affect that category. That's important. Shauna, I think that the partial ban countries are not subject to the ban on immigrant visas, but I'm looking at a summary and it's something I want to just double check. But I think the partial ban isn't affecting immigrant visas, it's only non-immigrant visas.
Let me verify that.
lawyers work together collaboratively because it's so easy um, when you don't collaborate to miss something. And I think I'm right, but please check.
Yes, I'll check.
Okay. Um, there's another change that occurred today, which is the government has put a pause on the ability to come to the United States with the diversity visa lottery. This is allegedly a reaction to the fact that the the murderer who committed suicide with the Brown University and the Brookline, Massachusetts murder had entered the United States with the diversity visa. And because of that, now we have a pause on the diversity program. But if you look at who's been able to come to the United States with the diversity lottery, many of them are from the Middle East and from Muslim majority countries. Many of them are non-white. And this is the real reason why the government is going after um, the, uh, the diversity visa lottery. Every time there's something negative in the news that about someone who's from a Muslim majority country or an immigrant. In this case, it was a Portuguese immigrant. The government's going to use that to take negative action that's going to impact many, many people, all of whom have nothing to do with what the negative action that occurred.
Thank you both so much for all the wisdom and guidance and words of encouragement and hope and resilience that you both gave us all today. Thank you all for those of you joining us today. It's a lot of important information we shared. There's so many resources as we continue to learn more about how it's being implemented and how people are being affected. We will be sharing through CAIR-Chicago and through our partner organizations all the resources, information that's available to us with you. Please keep an eye on our website at cairchicago.org and on our travel assistance project at tapus.org as well. We are here to support you in the ways that we can. I want to reiterate something that Kalman said is make sure, and Shauna said, that make sure you're reaching out to legal advice and getting appropriate and adequate legal advice before you make decisions to travel or any of your immigration work that or considerations that you're taking. Get that advice early before you make those decisions, before you book that travel, so that you can protect yourself and your loved ones from this fascist regime. Again, thank you all for joining. Thank you to Shauna and to Kalman for being with us as well today, and wishing you all a very wonderful weekend.
Hi.